The walls of Stonegate Penitentiary were indifferent to the hopes and dreams contained within. Cold, gray, and impossibly high, they stood as a constant reminder of confinement. Within those walls lived Andy, a man of quiet demeanor and an almost unsettling calm. He wasn't built for prison, not in the way that some of the other inmates were. There was no hardness in his eyes, no swagger in his step. Instead, he possessed an internal resilience, a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. Andy loved books. He devoured them, each page a temporary escape from the grim reality of his existence. He lost himself in tales of adventure, of faraway lands, of lives lived fully and freely. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were sustenance. They nourished his mind and spirit, reminding him that there was a world beyond Stonegate's unforgiving walls. He'd been inside for 5 years, a sentence he felt was unjust, a mistake that had cost him everything. The anger had faded long ago, replaced by a quiet determination. He wouldn't let prison break him. He would find a way to reclaim his life, to taste freedom once more. One sweltering afternoon, while listlessly sweeping the prison yard, Andy overheard a conversation between 2 guards. They were discussing the prison library, a small, underfunded space tucked away in a forgotten corner of the facility. The librarian, it seemed, was struggling to manage the overwhelming task of cataloging and maintaining the book collection. An idea sparked in Andy's mind, a faint glimmer of possibility in the darkness. He envisioned the library as a sanctuary, a place where he could immerse himself in books and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to carve his own path to freedom. The idea was nascent, fragile, but it took root in his mind and began to grow. He needed a plan, a way to get close to the books, to the knowledge they held, and to the secrets they might reveal. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Stonegate was designed to crush hope, to suffocate dreams. But Andy was different. He was a reader, a dreamer, and now, a man with a purpose. The library was his starting point. It was his hope. The following morning, Andy approached the head guard, Sergeant Reynolds, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with skepticism. "Sergeant," Andy began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I heard the library needs help. I'd like to volunteer." Reynolds raised a bushy eyebrow, his gaze sweeping over Andy as if assessing his worth. "You? What do you know about books, inmate?" "I read a lot, sir," Andy replied, meeting Reynolds's gaze without flinching. "I'm organized, and I'm a hard worker. I believe I could be of assistance." Reynolds grunted, considering the proposition. "The librarian's been complaining about being short-handed. It's not exactly a glamorous job, inmate. Mostly just sorting and shelving. And keeping the other cons from tearing the place apart." "I understand, sir. I'm willing to do whatever's needed." Andy's voice remained steady, betraying none of the anxiety churning within him. Reynolds studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged. "All right, I'll put in a word with the warden. Don't get your hopes up. He's got to approve it." Days crawled by, each one an agonizing wait. Andy tried to appear nonchalant, but his mind raced with possibilities and anxieties. He imagined the library, the layout, the potential weaknesses. He visualized himself surrounded by books, poring over maps, studying structural engineering, anything that could aid his escape. Finally, the summons came. Andy was led to the warden's office, a stark, imposing room that exuded authority. Warden Thompson, a stern, middle-aged man with a sharp gaze, sat behind a large oak desk. "Inmate, Anderson, is it?" Thompson consulted a file. "Yes, sir," Andy replied. "I understand you volunteered for library duty." "Yes, sir." Thompson leaned back in his chair, his eyes scrutinizing Andy. "Why? It's not exactly a sought-after position." Andy took a deep breath. "Sir, I believe in the power of books. They can educate, inspire, and provide hope, even in a place like this. I want to contribute something positive." Thompson remained silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a hint of a smile flickered across his lips. "All right, Anderson. You've got the job. But I'm warning you, I expect you to behave. One wrong move, and you'll be back in general population faster than you can say, Dewey Decimal System." Andy nodded, relief washing over him. "Yes, sir. You won't regret this." He had his foot in the door. The library awaited. The library was even more dilapidated than Andy had imagined. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows, illuminating rows upon rows of disorganized books. The air hung heavy with the scent of aged paper and neglect. Mrs. Peterson, the librarian, a kind-faced woman with a weary smile, greeted him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Anderson, right? Warden said you were coming. Thank goodness. I can barely keep up anymore." She gestured around the chaotic space. "As you can see, we're a bit behind." Andy surveyed the scene, his mind already cataloging and organizing. "Where do you want me to start, Mrs. Peterson?" "Just anywhere, really. Sorting the returned books would be a huge help. And maybe try to bring some order to the fiction section. It's a disaster." Andy nodded, his meticulous nature immediately kicking in. He started with the returned books, carefully checking each title against the card catalog, a system of index cards that seemed as ancient as the books themselves. He alphabetized, categorized, and meticulously reshelved each volume, his movements precise and efficient. Mrs. Peterson watched him with growing admiration. "You're a natural, Anderson," she said, after a few hours. "I haven't seen anyone this organized in years. Most of the inmates I get assigned here just try to sleep in the corner." Andy smiled faintly. "I like things to be in order, Mrs. Peterson. It helps me think." As the days turned into weeks, Andy became an indispensable part of the library. He learned the Dewey Decimal System, mastered the card catalog, and even started repairing damaged books. He was always punctual, always diligent, and always eager to help. His quiet efficiency and unwavering dedication earned him Mrs. Peterson's trust and respect. He also began to subtly explore the library, paying close attention to its layout and construction. He noted the placement of the windows, the thickness of the walls, and the location of the storage room at the back. The storage room, filled with old, forgotten books and discarded furniture, seemed to be the most promising area. It was secluded, rarely visited, and its back wall abutted the outer perimeter of the prison. He spent hours in the storage room, ostensibly sorting through the discarded books, but in reality, he was carefully examining the wall. He tapped on it, listened for hollow spots, and tried to gauge its thickness. He noticed that a large bookshelf was pushed flush against the wall, concealing a significant portion of it. This bookshelf, he realized, could be his key. It provided cover, concealment, and a potential starting point for his escape. The library, once just a glimmer of hope, was now becoming a tangible possibility. His meticulous nature and eagerness had not only earned him a position, but also the perfect cover for his true intentions. Now that Andy had identified the wall behind the bookshelf as his target, he needed a tool. He couldn't simply request a hammer and chisel, that would raise suspicion immediately. He had to be resourceful, to find something innocuous that he could adapt for his purpose. During one of his cleaning duties, he noticed a pile of discarded books destined for the incinerator. Many were beyond repair, their spines cracked, their pages torn. As he sorted through them, one particular book caught his eye, a thick, hardbound copy of The Complete Works of Shakespeare. The spine was unusually sturdy, made of a thick cardboard covered in a durable cloth. An idea sparked in his mind. He carefully selected the Shakespeare volume and, under the guise of repairing it, smuggled it back to his cell. That night, under the dim light of his cell, he began his work. He knew he couldn't simply use the spine as it was, it would be too blunt, too ineffective. He needed to sharpen it, to create a cutting edge. The process was slow, painstaking, and incredibly risky. He used a rough stone he'd managed to acquire from the prison yard, carefully rubbing the edge of the book's spine against it. The stone was coarse, and the spine was tough, but with hours of patient effort, a rudimentary point began to emerge. The sharpening process was nerve-wracking. The slightest sound could alert the guards, and the discovery of his makeshift tool would ruin everything. He worked late into the night, his heart pounding in his chest, pausing frequently to listen for any approaching footsteps. He used a small piece of cloth to muffle the sound of the stone against the spine, and he carefully collected the dust and shavings, disposing of them in the prison toilet. Days turned into weeks, and the point on the book's spine became sharper, more defined. It was still a crude tool, far from perfect, but it was the best he could do with the resources available to him. He tested its sharpness on a piece of wood he found in the yard, and it managed to make a small, shallow gouge. It was enough. He carefully concealed the sharpened book's spine within the pages of another, less conspicuous book, and smuggled it back to the library. His tool was ready. His plan was in motion. All that remained was to begin digging. The risk was immense, but the lure of freedom was even greater. He was ready to take the first step, to chip away at the walls that held him captive, one small piece at a time. The sharpened spine of Shakespeare would be his key. The day had arrived. The day Andy would finally put his plan into action. He felt a knot of nervous energy in his stomach, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He went through his usual routine, carefully shelving books, assisting Mrs. Peterson, and maintaining the facade of a diligent library worker. But beneath the surface, his mind was focused on the task ahead. During his afternoon break, he made his way to the storage room. He checked to make sure Mrs. Peterson was occupied at the front desk, then slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. The storage room was dim and musty, the air thick with the scent of decaying paper. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. He approached the bookshelf that concealed the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He carefully pulled the bookshelf away from the wall just enough to create a small gap, enough space for him to work. He reached into the book he had brought with him and retrieved the sharpened Shakespeare spine. It felt surprisingly heavy in his hand, a tangible symbol of his hope and determination. He pressed the point of the spine against the wall, taking a moment to assess the surface. It felt surprisingly solid, a mixture of brick and mortar. He took another deep breath and began to apply pressure, slowly twisting the spine back and forth. At first, nothing happened. The spine seemed to glide harmlessly against the wall. But then, with a barely audible crunch, a small chip of mortar broke away. A tiny fleck of dust floated in the air. It was a start. He continued to work, slowly and methodically, chipping away at the mortar, widening the small indentation. The work was exhausting, requiring immense patience and control. He had to be careful not to make too much noise, not to attract attention. He worked in short bursts, pausing frequently to listen for any sounds outside the storage room. The dust was a problem. It settled on his clothes, in his hair, and filled the air, making it difficult to breathe. He used a small rag to wipe away the dust, carefully concealing it in his pocket. He knew he couldn't leave any trace of his activity. After an hour, he had only managed to create a small hole, barely an inch deep. The progress was slow, agonizingly slow. But he refused to be discouraged. He knew this was a marathon, not a sprint. He had to be persistent, patient, and unwavering in his determination. He carefully pushed the bookshelf back into place, concealing the small hole. He cleaned up any remaining dust, making sure there was no evidence of his activity. He took one last look around the storage room, then slipped back out, returning to his duties in the library. He had taken the first step. The tunnel had begun. It was a small step, a barely perceptible change, but it was a start. And with each subsequent chip, each subsequent inch, he would move closer to his goal, freedom. The sharpened book spine was his tool, and the wall was his challenge. He would not be defeated. Andy settled into a routine. Each day, during his afternoon break, he would slip into the storage room and work on the tunnel. He knew he couldn't afford to be greedy, to try to rush the process. He had to be patient, methodical, and above all, discreet. He worked for about an hour each day, carefully chipping away at the mortar and brick. The progress was slow, almost imperceptible, but he refused to be discouraged. He measured his progress not in inches, but in days, in the steady accumulation of small gains. The dust remained a constant problem. He started using a small brush to sweep it into a dustpan, which he then emptied into a trash bag hidden behind a stack of old books. He was meticulous about cleaning up, ensuring that there was no trace of his activity. As the hole grew larger, he realized he needed a better way to dispose of the debris. The trash bag was filling up quickly, and he couldn't risk being seen carrying it out of the library. He needed an accomplice, someone he could trust. He thought of Red, an older inmate who worked in the prison laundry. Red was a quiet, unassuming man who kept to himself, but Andy had observed him over the years and sensed a certain integrity. He decided to approach him. One afternoon, while delivering clean laundry to the library, Andy cornered Red in the hallway. "Red, can I talk to you for a minute?" Red looked at him warily. "What do you want, Andy?" Andy lowered his voice. "I need your help with something. Something important." He explained his plan to Red, carefully outlining the risks and the potential rewards. Red listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Andy finished, Red remained silent for a long moment. "You're crazy, Andy," Red finally said. "You know that, right? This is a suicide mission." "I know the risks, Red," Andy replied. "But I can't stay in here. I need to get out." Red sighed. "And you want me to help you get rid of the dirt?" "Yeah, that's it. I can't do it alone. I need someone I can trust." Red looked at Andy for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help you. But you gotta promise me something, Andy. You gotta be careful. One slip up, and we're both in deep trouble." "I promise, Red," Andy said, relief washing over him. "I'll be careful." With Red's help, the disposal of the debris became much easier. Andy would fill small bags with the rubble and leave them in a designated spot in the library. Red would then collect the bags during his laundry rounds and dispose of them in the prison incinerator. The routine was risky, but it worked. The tunnel continued to grow, slowly but surely. Andy felt a surge of hope with each passing day, with each new inch of progress. He was one step closer to freedom. He was no longer alone. He had Red. And together, they would continue to chip away at the walls of Stonegate Penitentiary, one small piece at a time. The months bled into one another, marked only by the changing seasons and the slow, steady progress of the tunnel. Andy's life became a carefully choreographed dance of routine and subterfuge. He would wake before dawn, eat a meager breakfast, and head to the library. He would spend his mornings shelving books, assisting Mrs. Peterson, and maintaining the illusion of a model inmate. But as soon as his afternoon break arrived, he would transform, slipping into the storage room to resume his secret labor. The tunnel grew longer, wider, deeper. The small hole he had started with had become a narrow passage, just large enough for him to crawl through. He had to reinforce the walls with pieces of wood he scavenged from discarded furniture, to prevent the tunnel from collapsing. The sharpened book spine, his faithful companion, began to show signs of wear and tear. The point had dulled, and the spine had started to crack. He knew he would eventually need to find a replacement, but for now, it was still serviceable. He started using a small mirror to reflect sunlight into the tunnel, to provide himself with some illumination. The mirror was another piece of contraband he had managed to acquire, smuggled in by Red during his laundry runs. As the tunnel grew, so did Andy's knowledge. He used the library's resources to study geology, structural engineering, and map-making. He devoured books on escape techniques, learning about ventilation, drainage, and the properties of different types of soil. Mrs. Peterson, oblivious to Andy's true activities, continued to marvel at his dedication and resourcefulness. She often sought his advice on library matters, and Andy was always happy to help, offering suggestions on how to improve the organization and efficiency of the library. One day, Mrs. Peterson mentioned that the library was planning to host a series of lectures on various topics. She asked Andy if he had any suggestions. Andy thought for a moment. "Maybe you could have a lecture on local history," he said. "Or maybe one on map making. People are always interested in maps." Mrs. Peterson nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea, Andy. I'll look into it." Andy smiled inwardly. He knew that a lecture on mapmaking could be incredibly useful to him, providing him with valuable information about the surrounding area. The tunnel continued to be his primary focus, but he also used his time in the library to gather information, to learn about the world outside the walls of Stonegate. He was preparing himself for the day when he would finally emerge from the tunnel, a free man. The passage of time was marked by the growing tunnel and Andy's growing knowledge. Each day brought him closer to his goal. Mrs. Peterson had become more than just a librarian to Andy, she was a friend, a confidant, and an unwitting accomplice in his escape. He valued her kindness and her unwavering belief in him. He often felt a pang of guilt for deceiving her, but he knew that he couldn't tell her the truth. It would put her in danger, and he couldn't risk that. He continued to subtly guide her towards books and resources that would be helpful to his escape. He would casually mention his interest in geology, and Mrs. Peterson would eagerly search for books on the subject, delighted to find something that piqued his interest. "Oh, Andy, I found this wonderful book on the geology of this region," she said one day, handing him a thick volume with a worn cover. "It's got all sorts of information about the different types of soil and rock formations. I thought you might find it interesting." Andy smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I appreciate it." He devoured the book, memorizing the details of the local geology. He learned about the different layers of soil, the types of rock that lay beneath, and the location of underground water sources. This information would be invaluable when he finally emerged from the tunnel. He also expressed an interest in maps, and Mrs. Peterson was more than happy to oblige. She found him old topographical maps of the area, road maps, and even a detailed map of the prison grounds. "These maps are fascinating, Mrs. Peterson," Andy said, tracing his finger along the lines and contours. "They tell you so much about the land." He studied the maps carefully, memorizing the layout of the prison grounds, the location of the guard towers, and the surrounding terrain. He identified potential escape routes and hiding places. Mrs. Peterson's enthusiasm for books was infectious, and Andy found himself genuinely enjoying the process of learning. He discovered new authors, new subjects, and new perspectives. The library had become a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the harsh realities of prison life and immerse himself in the world of knowledge. He knew that he couldn't stay in the library forever. His time was running out. He had to finish the tunnel and make his escape. But he would always be grateful to Mrs. Peterson for her kindness, her friendship, and her unwitting assistance. She had given him hope when he needed it most, and she had helped him to prepare for the journey ahead. Her friendly nature made it easier for him to acquire the knowledge he needed. He was ready. One sweltering afternoon, as Andy was deep inside the tunnel, reinforcing a section of the wall with scavenged wood, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, accompanied by the jangling of keys. A guard. His heart leaped into his throat. He froze, his muscles tense, his mind racing. He knew he had only seconds to conceal his work. He scrambled out of the tunnel, his movements frantic but precise. He grabbed the bookshelf and pushed it back into place, covering the entrance to the tunnel. He grabbed the brush and dustpan and quickly swept away any loose dirt, trying to make it look like he had just been cleaning. The footsteps grew closer. He could hear the guard's heavy breathing, the creak of his leather boots. He grabbed a book from a nearby shelf and pretended to read, his eyes darting nervously towards the door. The door swung open, and Sergeant Reynolds strode into the storage room, his eyes scanning the space. "Routine inspection, Anderson," he said, his voice gruff. Andy tried to appear calm, but he could feel the sweat trickling down his back. "Yes, Sergeant," he said, his voice barely audible. Reynolds walked around the storage room, his eyes lingering on the bookshelf that concealed the tunnel. Andy held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel Reynolds's gaze boring into him, as if he could see right through the bookshelf, right into the tunnel. Reynolds reached out and ran his hand along the bookshelf, his fingers brushing against the edge. Andy's muscles tensed. He was sure Reynolds would notice something, some small detail that would betray his secret. "What are you doing in here, Anderson?" Reynolds asked, his voice suspicious. "Just sorting through some old books, Sergeant," Andy replied, trying to sound casual. "Mrs. Peterson asked me to clear out some of the clutter." Reynolds grunted, his eyes still fixed on the bookshelf. He seemed to be considering something, weighing his options. "All right, Anderson," he said finally, his voice still suspicious. "Just make sure you're not slacking off. We don't pay you to stand around reading books." He turned and strode out of the storage room, the door swinging shut behind him. Andy stood there for a long moment, his legs trembling, his heart still pounding. He had come close, too close. He had almost been discovered. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He knew he couldn't let this scare him. He had to be more careful, more vigilant. He had to find a way to protect his tunnel, to prevent another close call like this from happening again. The fear was real, but the desire for freedom was stronger. He would not give up. Not now. Not ever. The close call served as a stark reminder of the ever-present danger. The tunnel was far from a smooth path to freedom. Andy faced numerous obstacles that tested his resolve and threatened to derail his plan. One day, he encountered a section of the wall that was unusually thick and hard. The brick was denser, the mortar more resistant. The sharpened book spine struggled to make any headway. He spent hours chipping away at the stubborn wall, his muscles aching, his hands raw. Progress slowed to a crawl. He considered giving up, of diverting the tunnel in another direction. But he knew that would only prolong the process, and he didn't want to risk running into another obstacle. He decided to persevere, to keep chipping away at the wall, one small piece at a time. Another time, he struck something metallic. At first, he thought it was another layer of brick, but as he chipped away at the surrounding mortar, he realized it was a pipe. A water pipe, judging by the condensation on its surface. He cursed under his breath. He knew that damaging the pipe could flood the tunnel, attracting attention and ruining everything. He had to find a way to bypass it. He carefully examined the pipe, tracing its path along the wall. He realized that it ran diagonally across the tunnel, making it difficult to avoid. He considered trying to cut through the pipe, but he knew that was too risky. He didn't have the tools, and he didn't want to risk causing a leak. He decided to dig around the pipe, creating a small alcove that would allow him to bypass it. The process was slow and painstaking, but he managed to avoid damaging the pipe. The constant threat of discovery was another major obstacle. He knew that at any moment, a guard could walk into the storage room and discover his tunnel. He had to be constantly vigilant, always on guard. He started rigging up a makeshift alarm system, using a string and a few small bells. He would attach the string to the door of the storage room, so that if anyone opened the door, the bells would ring, alerting him to their presence. The alarm system was crude, but it gave him some peace of mind. It allowed him to focus on his work, knowing that he would have some warning if someone was approaching. Despite the obstacles, Andy refused to give up. He was determined to escape from Stonegate, no matter the cost. He knew that the journey would be long and difficult, but he was willing to face any challenge, to overcome any obstacle. His spirit would not be broken. He would not be defeated. The thick wall, the pipes, and the threat of discovery only strengthened his resolve. The routine with Red was working well, but Andy knew it wasn't sustainable in the long term. The tunnel was producing more and more debris each day, and Red was starting to become nervous. He was worried about getting caught, and Andy couldn't blame him. Andy needed to find a way to dispose of the debris more efficiently, without putting Red at risk. He considered various options, but none of them seemed feasible. He couldn't simply dump the debris in the prison yard, that would be too obvious. He couldn't burn it, the smoke would attract attention. He needed a solution that was both discreet and effective. One day, while working in the library, he noticed another inmate, a young man named Tommy, who was assigned to clean the outside grounds around the building. Tommy was a quiet, unassuming kid who kept to himself, but Andy had observed him and sensed a certain trustworthiness. He decided to approach Tommy. He knew it was a risk, but he was running out of options. "Tommy, can I talk to you for a minute?" Andy asked one afternoon, as Tommy was sweeping the sidewalk outside the library. Tommy looked at him warily. "What do you want?" Andy lowered his voice. "I need your help with something." "Something, discreet." He explained his plan to Tommy, carefully outlining the risks and the rewards. He told him about the tunnel, about his desire to escape, and about his need for someone to help him dispose of the debris outside the library. Tommy listened intently, his eyes wide with disbelief. When Andy finished, Tommy remained silent for a long moment. "You're digging a tunnel?" Tommy finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you crazy?" "I know it sounds crazy, Tommy," Andy replied. "But I'm serious. I need your help." "What would I have to do?" Tommy asked, his curiosity piqued. "Just take the bags of dirt and rocks and dump them somewhere outside the library," Andy explained. "There are some overgrown bushes near the back, and no one ever goes back there. You can just dump it there, a little at a time." Tommy hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it. But you gotta promise me something. You gotta promise me you won't get me in trouble." "I promise, Tommy," Andy said, relief washing over him. "I'll protect you." With Tommy's help, the disposal of the debris became much easier. Andy would leave the bags of rubble near the back door of the library, and Tommy would collect them during his cleaning rounds and dump them behind the bushes. The routine was still risky, but it was less risky than relying solely on Red. And it allowed Andy to focus more on the tunnel, knowing that the debris was being taken care of. The tunnel continued to grow, slowly but surely. Andy felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that he had two allies on his side, Red and Tommy. Together, they would continue to work towards his freedom, one small bag of dirt at a time. The support of Tommy eased the burden. Time marched on, a relentless rhythm of days and nights within the stone walls of Stonegate. The tunnel, however, was a testament to Andy's unwavering dedication. Short Scene 1, a close-up of Andy's hands, calloused and worn, expertly wielding the sharpened book spine. The point, though dulled, finds its mark with increasing precision, chipping away at the brick and mortar. The pile of rubble at his feet grows larger, a tangible measure of his progress. Short Scene 2, Andy crawling through the tunnel, which is now long enough that the entrance is barely visible behind him. The walls are reinforced with wooden planks, creating a crude but effective support system. He uses a small trowel, fashioned from a tin can lid, to smooth the walls and pack the dirt. Short Scene 3, Andy studying a geology textbook under the dim light of the storage room. He flips through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. He points to a diagram of different soil layers, comparing it to the soil he is excavating from the tunnel. Short Scene 4, Andy whispering to Red in the hallway, exchanging a knowing glance. Red discreetly picks up a small bag filled with rubble, concealing it beneath his laundry basket. He nods reassuringly to Andy, then disappears down the corridor. Short Scene 5, Tommy sweeping the sidewalk outside the library, his eyes darting nervously around. He quickly grabs a bag of rubble from behind the back door and dumps it behind the overgrown bushes, careful not to attract attention. Short Scene 6, a time-lapse shot of the tunnel entrance, showing the gradual accumulation of dirt and debris over the months. The small hole has become a gaping maw, a testament to Andy's relentless digging. Short Scene 7, Andy using a small mirror to reflect sunlight into the tunnel. The beam of light illuminates the interior, revealing the progress he has made. He smiles faintly, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Short Scene 8, Andy meticulously cleaning up the storage room after a day of digging, making sure that there is no trace of his activity. He sweeps the floor, wipes down the walls, and carefully conceals the tunnel entrance. Short Scene 9, a wide shot of the tunnel, showing its impressive length and the crude but effective support system. Andy crawls through the tunnel, his body silhouetted against the dim light. He is a man on a mission, driven by an unyielding desire for freedom. The tunnel was no longer just a hole in the wall, it was a symbol of Andy's resilience, his determination, and his unwavering hope. It was a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, to endure hardship, and to never give up on the dream of freedom. Andy's skills sharpened, and the tunnel grew, inch by inch, day by day. He was getting closer. The news hit Andy like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Peterson was retiring. After decades of service, she was finally hanging up her librarian spectacles and moving to Florida to live with her daughter. Andy felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He was genuinely fond of Mrs. Peterson. She had been a constant source of kindness and support during his time in the library. He would miss her warm smile, her gentle nature, and her unwavering belief in him. But beyond the personal loss, Andy realized that Mrs. Peterson's retirement posed a significant threat to his escape plan. She was, albeit unwittingly, his greatest ally. Her presence provided him with cover, her trust allowed him to move freely within the library, and her enthusiasm for books had given him access to valuable resources. With Mrs. Peterson gone, a new librarian would be appointed. Someone who didn't know him, someone who might be more suspicious, more observant. Someone who might discover his tunnel. He tried to remain optimistic, to convince himself that he could adapt to the new circumstances. But he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and not for the better. He approached Mrs. Peterson one afternoon, his heart heavy with sadness. "I heard you're retiring, Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice subdued. Mrs. Peterson smiled sadly. "Yes, Andy. It's time. I'm getting too old for this place. I'm going to miss you," Andy said sincerely. "You've been a good friend to me." Mrs. Peterson reached out and took his hand. "I'm going to miss you too, Andy. You're one of the best inmates I've ever had working for me. You're smart, you're hardworking, and you have a good heart." Andy felt a pang of guilt. He was deceiving this kind woman, using her trust to further his own selfish agenda. He wanted to tell her the truth, to confess his sins. But he couldn't. It would put her in danger, and he couldn't do that. "I hope you find happiness in Florida, Mrs. Peterson," Andy said, forcing a smile. "You deserve it." "Thank you, Andy," Mrs. Peterson said. "I hope you find happiness too. Wherever you may be." The day of Mrs. Peterson's retirement party arrived. The library was decorated with balloons and streamers, and the inmates and guards gathered to bid her farewell. Andy stood in the corner, watching the festivities with a heavy heart. He knew that this was the end of an era. The library would never be the same without Mrs. Peterson. And his escape plan would be much more difficult without her. He was losing a valuable ally, and he didn't know what the future held. The future looked uncertain without her help. 2 years. 2 years of meticulous planning, relentless digging, and unwavering determination. 2 years of living a double life, balancing the facade of a model inmate with the secret reality of his escape. 2 years of hope, fear, and unwavering resolve. And now, it was finally coming to an end. Andy stood at the end of the tunnel, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the cool night air seeping through the cracks in the wall, a tantalizing promise of freedom. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. He raised the sharpened book spine, his faithful companion for the past 2 years, and pressed it against the final layer of brick and mortar. He applied pressure, twisting the spine back and forth, his muscles straining. The wall resisted for a moment, then with a loud crack, it gave way. A rush of cool air washed over him, carrying the scent of earth and freedom. He had broken through. He dropped the book spine and reached out, widening the hole. He pulled away the remaining bricks, creating an opening large enough to crawl through. He hesitated for a moment, savoring the feeling of victory. He had done it. He had overcome the odds, defied the system, and carved his own path to freedom. He took one last look back at the tunnel, at the symbol of his resilience and determination. Then, he crawled through the opening, into the darkness. He emerged into a small patch of overgrown bushes, just beyond the outer perimeter of the prison. The night air was crisp and clean, a welcome contrast to the stale, musty air of the library. He stood up, his legs wobbly, his body stiff from spending so much time cramped in the tunnel. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fresh air. It was the sweetest breath he had ever taken. He looked up at the night sky, marveling at the stars. He hadn't seen the stars in 2 years. They were more beautiful than he remembered. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of euphoria. He was free. He had escaped from Stonegate. But he knew that his journey was far from over. He still had to evade capture, to find a safe place to hide, and to start a new life. He consulted the map he had memorized, orienting himself to the surrounding terrain. He knew that the nearest town was several miles away, but he also knew that there was a secluded forest to the north, where he could hide until he figured out his next move. He started walking, his movements cautious and deliberate. He stayed in the shadows, avoiding the main roads, and relying on his knowledge of the local geography to guide him. The books he had read in the library proved to be invaluable. He used his knowledge of geology to identify safe paths through the forest, avoiding areas with loose soil or unstable ground. He used his knowledge of botany to identify edible plants and avoid poisonous ones. He even used his knowledge of astronomy to navigate by the stars. He walked for hours, his body aching, his feet sore. But he refused to stop. He knew that he couldn't afford to rest, not until he was safely away from Stonegate. As dawn approached, he reached the edge of the forest. He slipped into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. He found a secluded clearing and collapsed on the ground, exhausted. He slept for several hours, his dreams filled with images of freedom. When he woke up, he felt refreshed and renewed. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was confident that he could make it. He spent the next few days hiding in the forest, foraging for food and water, and planning his next move. He knew that the authorities would be searching for him, and he had to be careful not to get caught. He decided to make his way to the nearest city, where he could blend in with the crowds and start a new life. He knew it would be risky, but he didn't have any other options. He used his knowledge of mapmaking to plan his route, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the back trails. He used his knowledge of disguise to alter his appearance, cutting his hair and changing his clothes. He set out on his journey, his heart filled with hope and determination. He was a free man, and he was. Back at Stonegate, the morning routine proceeded as usual. The inmates lined up for breakfast, the guards patrolled the corridors, and the new librarian, a stern woman named Miss Harding, prepared for her first day on the job. But something was amiss. Andy was nowhere to be found. At first, the guards assumed he was simply late, perhaps sick or injured. But as the morning wore on and Andy failed to appear, they began to grow concerned. Sergeant Reynolds, remembering his past suspicions about Andy, decided to investigate. He went to the library and asked Miss Harding if she had seen Andy. Miss Harding shook her head. "No, Sergeant. He hasn't shown up for work." I assumed he was excused. Reynolds's suspicions deepened. He went to Andy's cell and found it empty. The bed was neatly made, but there was no sign of Andy. He immediately raised the alarm. A prison-wide search was launched, with guards scouring every corner of the facility. But Andy was nowhere to be found. Reynolds, his mind racing, remembered the storage room in the library. He had always had a feeling about that place, about Andy's unusual interest in it. He raced to the library and burst into the storage room, Miss Harding trailing behind him, her face etched with confusion. Reynolds went straight to the bookshelf that concealed the back wall. He pushed it aside and stared in disbelief. Behind the bookshelf was a gaping hole, a dark and ominous passage that led into the unknown. What in the world? Miss Harding gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Reynolds didn't answer. He knew exactly what had happened. Andy had escaped. He immediately radioed the warden, his voice tight with anger and embarrassment. "Warden, we have a situation. Anderson has escaped. He dug a tunnel out of the library." Chaos erupted within the prison walls. Guards scrambled to secure the perimeter, search dogs were unleashed, and helicopters took to the air, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. The news of Andy's escape spread like wildfire among the inmate population. Some were shocked, others were envious, and still others were inspired. Andy had done the impossible. He had beaten the system. He had escaped from Stonegate. Warden Thompson, his face grim, arrived at the library. He stared at the tunnel entrance, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe that one of his inmates had managed to pull off such an audacious escape. He turned to Reynolds, his eyes blazing with anger. "Find him, Reynolds," he barked. "Find him, and bring him back here. I want Anderson back in Stonegate before the sun rises." Stonegate was in chaos. Years passed. The name Andy Anderson faded from the headlines, becoming just another forgotten footnote in the annals of Stonegate Penitentiary. But Andy never forgot. He never forgot the injustice that had landed him in prison, the friends who had helped him escape, or the lessons he had learned along the way. He settled in a small coastal town, far from Stonegate and its long reach. He adopted a new name, a new identity, and a new way of life. He worked odd jobs, always careful to avoid attracting attention. But he couldn't simply disappear. He couldn't ignore the injustices of the world. He had to use his intelligence and resourcefulness for good. He started volunteering at a local library, helping children learn to read. He shared his love of books, hoping to inspire them to dream big and never give up on their hopes. He also started helping people who had been wrongly accused of crimes, using his knowledge of the legal system to fight for their freedom. He became a champion of the underdog, a defender of the innocent. He never forgot Red and Tommy, the friends who had risked their lives to help him escape. He found ways to send them money and letters, always careful to avoid revealing his location. He often thought of Mrs. Peterson, wondering if she had ever found out about his escape. He hoped that she wouldn't be too disappointed in him. He hoped that she would understand that he had done what he had to do to survive. He lived a simple life, but it was a fulfilling life. He was free. He was using his intelligence and resourcefulness to make the world a better place. He was always looking over his shoulder, always aware of the risks. But he refused to let fear control him. He was determined to live his life to the fullest, to honor the freedom he had fought so hard to achieve. One day, while walking along the beach, he saw a young boy struggling to read a book. He stopped and offered to help. The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with curiosity. "What's your name?" the boy asked. Andy smiled. "My name is Andy," he said. "And I love books." His intelligence and resourcefulness were now dedicated to good. Andy's voiceover. "Stonegate, it was a dark chapter in my life, a place I try not to dwell on. But I can't deny that it shaped me, that it taught me valuable lessons. It taught me about resilience, about the importance of hope, and about the power of knowledge. Prison is designed to break you, to strip you of your dignity, to crush your spirit. But it doesn't have to. You can choose to resist, to hold on to your humanity, to find light in the darkness. The library, that was my sanctuary, my escape. Those books, they weren't just words on a page, they were windows to another world, tools that helped me claw my way out. They taught me about geography, about geology, about structural engineering, about everything I needed to know to make my escape a reality. Knowledge is power. That's what I learned in Stonegate. And it's a lesson I've carried with me every day since. But knowledge isn't enough. You also need hope. You need to believe that things can get better, that you can overcome any obstacle, that you can achieve your dreams. Hope is what kept me going during those long, dark nights in the tunnel. It was the light at the end of the tunnel, the promise of freedom that motivated me to keep digging, to keep pushing forward, to never give up. And finally, you need friends. You need people who believe in you, who support you, who are willing to risk everything to help you achieve your goals. Red, Tommy, even Mrs. Peterson in her own way, they were my lifeline. They gave me strength when I was weak, courage when I was afraid, and hope when I was ready to give up. Freedom is a precious gift. It's something that should never be taken for granted. It's something that should be cherished and protected. I spent 2 years of my life locked away behind those walls, and I never forgot what it felt like to be free. And that's why I've dedicated my life to helping others, to fighting for justice, and to making the world a better place. Because everyone deserves to be free. Everyone deserves to have hope. And everyone deserves to have the opportunity to live their dreams. Fade out, the end.